It's the beginning of August. We are deep in the off-season portion of the off-season, but that doesn't mean that it's the off-season for basketball, she wrote. Because today, I'm joined by a very special guest. I'm assuming everyone is going to recognize him. Head coach of the Indiana Pacers, Rick Carlisle. Rick, how is your summer going? Have you had a summer?
Well, it's going to be short, which is good. When you play to the very last possible day of the regular season and playoffs, your summer is quite a bit shorter than normal. When I came into the league and was playing with the Boston Celtics for my first 3 years in the NBA, we were in the finals every year, and so we would be done sometime in mid to late June, and then before you knew it, it was late September again, and we were in training camp. And so, I've been down this road before. Of course, we were in the finals in 2011 with the Mavericks, and so it was similar, but in that instance, we went right into a lockout, and so the season didn't get started until there was kind of a mini training camp in December, and I think our first game was the Christmas Day game where we had a rematch with Miami and got slaughtered. And so, So anyway, short summer, but it's been good so far.
The draft is over. Summer League is over. However, I do want to take us back to before the NBA Finals, to another time when you guys were playing the Oklahoma City Thunder in March. I'm not sure if you're going to be aware of this, but before that game, Mark Daigneault was doing pregame media, and he said of you that you were way, way ahead of your time with regard to the style of play and use of random movement when you won a championship in Dallas, which according to him wasn't something that many teams were doing back in 2011. So my goal for the two of us today is kind of to define to the listeners what random offense is, in so much as it can actually be defined. So let's start there. When a team of yours, whether it's the 2011 Mavericks, whether it's the 2025 Indiana Pacers, or any team in between there, is playing random, what does that look like?
Well, the hope is it looks different every time. And so, you're digging very deep here, and I appreciate the question, but I'm going to have to go back a long way. So back to, when I took the Dallas job in 2008, the first year we had a rough start. We were still in a lot of play calling era of the game, for coaches and players. And we got to a point in that season, probably in December, or might have even been in January. And it just occurred to me that it was probably time to talk to Jason Kidd, who was the starting point guard and still a great player at that point in time, about taking over the play calling and just getting the game more amped up, because he was so good at facilitating, initiating, engaging the right guys at the right time. He did it with eye contact, inflection, just, and he just had this presence about him as a leader on the floor. So, at that time we were watching games and film on DVDs. So I had a DVD that had all of our plays. We didn't have a ton of plays, but we had some. And I said, look, do you have interest in doing this? And that is basically running the team. And, I may talk to you about plays during timeouts or draw some stuff up here and there, but I want you to run the team and just do what you do. And he was like, yeah, I'd love to do that. So I said, look, here's a DVD with our plays and the calls and stuff like that. I said, all this stuff anyway, but just to have it as a reference if needed. And then, from that point forward, our season changed tremendously, just a whole lot. And, we started off, we were under 500. We got back to 500 somewhere in December. It sounded kind of like our last 2 years with the Pacers. And then we finished strong and ended up with 50 wins, and we won in the first round. So, it was reverential for me. Just seeing the power of the players on the floor, particularly a great player like Jason. And as the whole thing went on, we went into our second year. We had a good year, but then we had a tough loss in the first round. And then going into my third year, we acquired Tyson Chandler, who really finished off that team. And as we got into that season, it was similar. We still had plays. Jason was still running the team. JJ Barea was our backup point guard. He was, one of the best backup point guards, in the game at the time. And these guys they knew how to play. And it became clearer and clearer to me that as we got into that season and we're heading toward the playoffs, that the more we could play randomly, the better. And so, particularly as you get deeper into the playoffs, I mean, the familiarity rises between opposing teams. The scouting, just becomes otherworldly. I mean, the other team knows your calls. The players on the other team know your calls. And so it's almost like, and when we played Miami in the finals in 11, every time I drew something up out of a timeout, the thing would get blown up. And finally, we just got into the second, third game of the series moving forward. And it was just like, hey, just keep it moving.
Yeah.
Keep it moving. And look, we had guys that really knew how to play. I mean, Nowitzki was, one of the great players of all time, but he's also one of the great flow players and one of the great pace after players, which is what we call flow now. Flow is always play the game. Some coaches call it, play the game. But pace is, our speed game. Pace after is playing randomly and getting to the next action. Some teams, the coach will will yell out, play the game. When we're playing New York, Tom Thibodeau used to, when they would get to the second and thirds of the shot clock, would yell out, action, and that just means keep playing, keep moving it, get to the next action. But, when you're playing a team like Miami back in those days, Miami was, they were one of the best defensive teams we had ever seen. And they were, they left the corners routinely because they could help off the corner and were athletic enough and tenacious enough to get back to the corner, And so if you were predictable in any way, shape, or form, forget about scoring, you were going to have trouble getting shots. So, this whole thing kind of took on a life of its own. Jason Kidd certainly was a big part of it. And then, we got hot at the right time that year, much like what happened with us this year. But we're able to win the series in 6 and, didn't have to go to a 7th game. But that's kind of the genesis of the beginning of it. And if you want to go way back, and I think your listeners and people watching will find this interesting. When I was also heavily influenced by two other things. One was my 3 years with Boston, and back in those days we had a few plays, but it was just that we were just playing the game. And this is a story that is very interesting to me, and I think will illustrate the point pretty well. When I went from Boston and became a member of the New York Knicks, Rick Pitino was the coach, and his scouts, and the scouts that his assistant coaches were doing were so intricate. And so Stu Jackson, I think, was a coach that came to me. He had the Boston Celtics scout, and he came to me with these diagram sheets, and there were, each sheet probably had a dozen diagrams, and he had like 3 or 4 sheets with all these different actions on them. And he goes, Rick, I got to get these play calls. We got to get these play calls, because Rick was really big on having every detail. And I said, Stu, these aren't plays. They're just playing the game. They're just playing basketball. And he's like, what? I said, yeah, there's only about 4 or 5 calls, and the Celtics teams with Red Auerbach during the period where they won 9 and 11 years, they only had 7 plays total. And
Wow.
so we may have had more than 7 plays at that time, but a lot of it was free-flowing action. It was empowerment of the players. There were great players. I mean, there was 5 or 6 Hall of Fame players on that team. And so Casey Jones had very little difficulty, turning the reins over to Dennis Johnson, Larry Bird, Robert Parrish, McHale, and those guys. And then the other big influence for me, I mean, and I'll do some name dropping here. I'm fortunate to have gotten to know some of the world's greatest jazz musicians, over the last 30 years. So Bruce Hornsby is a close friend. He's a jazz piano player, along with being a guy that's merged jazz voicings to popular music. And he's still doing a lot of really, cool stuff and new and different stuff. Christian McBride is considered one of the great bass players of all time, and right now in the traditional jazz trio quartet world, he's considered the best bass player in the world. Branford Marsalis is probably the greatest sax player of our time, and I've gotten to know these guys personally. I've seen them perform, and jazz music, to me, I'm really drawn to it and always have been. I'm a novice piano player. I'm a novice jazz blues player. I'm good enough to know great playing, and wish I could play the way they played. But they play the same song, but it's different every time they play it. And so, the influence of jazz and these guys in particular on me in coaching, I mean, to me, and particularly being in Indiana, where people are so drawn to the purity of the game, the unselfish aspects of the game, etc. The more the game can be random and unselfish and simply finding the right shot at the right time, it makes it infinitely harder to guard. That's one thing. And the other thing, it's just part of the purity and the beauty of the game. But music has had a big influence on my coaching, because I just figure if I'm so drawn to that kind of music because it's different and evolving all the time, why wouldn't our fans be? Because I know I am when it comes to basketball.
I think that's the perfect analogy, and it's going to be much better than the one that I was going to make, which I was going to say that when I'm watching you guys play a game and I'm differentiating between, are they calling a play or are they playing random, I think it looks like the difference of when you were playing in a park. Like when people show up to play pickup, that's what random looks like versus playing out of a play call, just with a novice eye. But I guess my question in relation to that is versus 2011 to now, you're talking about guys who know how to play. Do you find this more or less difficult to implement in 2025 than when you were doing it in 2011? Because I know that like now there's kind of this term of like the trainerification of basketball, and that a lot of times kids growing up now are working at basketball maybe more so than they are always playing basketball. So have you noticed that? Is it harder for you to implement it now than it was when you were in Dallas? Or maybe it's the reverse of that. Maybe you think it's easier to put this in now.
Well, this is an important question because, the game has changed so much in the last 3 years. And the game is changing really by the week and by the month. And it's not just the offensive elements of the game. I mean, the defensive elements of the game too. Defense, in my opinion, is evolving and changing all the time, even more than offense. But I do think that there's a perception by young players, that grew up watching, like Kobe Bryant is a big influence of players in this generation that are coming into the league or that have come in the last 3 or 4 years. And, most of Kobe's career, he played, I don't know if it's most, but a significant number of years, he was in the triangle. And there were a lot of catch and hold situations. I mean, the triangle was a great movement offense, but it was really based on a constant changing of the geography of the floor to make it difficult to ever be able to effectively come and double team great players. So you had Pippen and Jordan in the triangle, you had Shaq and Kobe in the triangle. Of course, Phil Jackson was the only guy that ever had any kind of sustained success with the triangle offense. A lot of us have tried different aspects of it. But those players watching Kobe saw one thing, and there was so much about Kobe Bryant to be drawn to. For me, it was always just the killer aspect of his persona. Whether it was the Mamba thing or whatever. Like when my daughter was growing up and she was 4, 5, 6 years old, the first player that she ever talked about or ever knew about was Kobe Bryant, opposing player.
Yeah.
And one day she said to me, "Daddy, who are you playing tonight?" And I said, "The Lakers." And she said, "Uh-oh, that's trouble. That's Kobe, right?" And she was like 6.5 years old, And so, but today's game is so different. There are very few catch and hold players. There are some that are still very good at it. And I got to be careful about saying catch and hold. It's just, our game, if you watch the Pacers, is a hot ball game. It has to be. It has to be the way we're structured and set up. And like you look at our team, and like this is a natural style for Tyrese. It's pretty natural for Nembhard. For McConnell, the pace makes a lot of sense for him to play in this style. Pascal has adjusted, and I give Pascal Siakam a great deal of credit. He came here as a veteran player, and he had to adjust to the tempo and the running and the speed of the game, but also, he was a guy, and when he was in his heyday with Toronto, and Lowry had moved on to another team, he was really as much of a point guard on that team as anybody. So he had the ball a lot. And so Pascal has adjusted his game to our style as well. And I'll be real honest. This is a part of Ben Mathurin's game that we keep talking to him about. And he's a guy that is just a natural scorer. I mean, you put him in a rat game with a bunch of switching and a bunch of physical stuff, and the guy's going to go find 18 points and he's going to shoot 7 free throws at least. But the pure elements of the passing and the quick decisions and stuff like that are things that he's gradually getting, and he's going to get there. And I think, this year, right now, and I'll break the news right here. I'm projecting him as our starter at 2 this year. I think, on day 1, and I told him this, I was on the phone with him and his agent 4 days ago. And I said, you're going to be with the starters on day 1. It's your job to lose, but here's what we need from you. We need you to keep working on the running and simply running to the corners and stretching out the defense. Like you look at Ben Shepherd's game. I mean, Ben Shepherd probably gets more open corner threes than anybody on our team, simply because he's a soldier about getting to the corners. And, so that's one thing that's gotten him on the floor, along with the fact that system-wise, he's a soldier in our system. He does everything we ask him to do defensively and offensively. And if he has a flaw, it's probably that he's probably not quite aggressive enough offensively looking to score. But in Ben's case, we need him to be a great runner, a great decision maker. He as a movement guy, he's come light years. and he really understands. And so, this year, with him as a starter on day one, and again, this is his job to lose, and it's important to him to be a starter. He played very well as a starter last game, but we got to a point where adjusting him out of the starting lineup became the best decision for our team as Aaron Nesmith became healthy. And Aaron Nesmith was a guy that, at Vanderbilt, he was a guy that, Jerry Stackhouse ran all kinds of set plays for him to run, catch, and shoot. And in our system with Indiana, he learned very quickly how he needed to adapt. Lloyd Pierce works with him on a day-to-day basis, work with Aaron on running, footwork, blur screening, chase screening, doing all the random things, spacing the floor wider than probably intuitively a lot of people would think. And so these are the adjustments that Ben is going to have to make as well. And I think one of the things that's a challenge with Ben is that he saw a path to being a great player in the NBA that was probably a little dated now. If you're looking at guys like Kobe and other guys that were more ball centric, during that period. I mean, the game has just changed a lot. And so, to be a great player now in a system like ours, and Pascal is living proof. And I give him all the credit in the world. He's a great leader on our team, and he made tough adjustments where a lot of vet players would have come in and just said, "Hey, I've been an all-star twice, I've been all-league twice. You guys got to get more with me." But he's a great example of sacrifices that are made so that a group like ours could have a run like we had this year. But Ben Mathurin's going to get there. He has such great gifts as a scorer, and our job as coaches is to meld guys like him that aren't necessarily seamless fits into a style that is effective for the rest of the guys, and bring both forces hopefully closer together as time goes on.
2 follow-ups with that, especially when we're talking about Mathurin and having to meld that style. I think a lot of what you're talking about there, quick decision-making, is feel something that can be taught?
I believe it can. I'm not a believer that people can't enhance their game on the basketball floor, especially, if we're talking about Mathurin, and like Nesmith's another example of a guy that played in a very structured system in college. And then, with the Celtics, they were a bit more isocentric because of how their team was structured. And so that's not really Aaron's game either. The way it all worked out was that Aaron made the adjustments, and now he's a core piece in our system. But Ben Mathurin's going to get there. I mean, the guy's got brains. I've not met a more determined, more competitive guy as a young player. And the guy's 22 years old. What wouldn't I give to be 22 years old again? Not much. Not much I wouldn't give.
Would there ever be a roster that you would look at and think that you weren't going to play this way? Or is this the style that you would prefer to play and you'd like to bring people along to be able to do it because you think this is where the NBA is at, this is what's going to lead to the most efficient offense, or is it more this is what's best for the group that we have?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I was asked this I remember when I was asked this, we were in New York, I was with Dallas, we were in the midst of a rebuild, and it wasn't really a mini rebuild. I mean, we hadn't gotten Luka yet. We had, Dennis Smith Jr. was I think a first year player, and he was the 9th pick, and we were excited about him. We had other younger guys, but we were losing. And so, we had won the championship a few years before. So somebody asked me, what is this like going through this? You're so used to winning with Dallas. And, my answer was, I made the conscious decision a few years ago, and this was around 17, 18, somewhere in there, that my coaching style and the way I approached NBA coaching was going to be based upon the players that I had. And so, in Dallas, I had such great loyalty to Mark Cuban, Donnie Nelson during those periods. They had done so much for me that, I was all in on reshaping the roster however we needed to do it, absorbing the losses, getting some good young players, trying to figure the rest out through free agency and, hopefully high value contracts and kind of going from there. The situation here now is a little different. I mean, one thing that I'm really proud of our guys with and our coaching staff as well is that, we're playing a system now that's changing the game somewhat. And you look around the NBA 2-3 years ago, nobody was picking up full court during the regular season, or doing that kind of stuff. I mean, this was unheard of, but we got into a situation where we knew going into the playoffs last year that, for us to maintain pace and tempo, that we were going to have to do something to create that leverage. And the answer was simple. It was going to be full court pressure. It was going to be physicality, persistence, 94 feet. And that was just how we're going to have to do business. And so now we're down the road with this team, and this is how we're building this team. And so, we're looking for pieces that fit our system. And as Kevin Pritchard, Chad Buchanan, myself, my coaching staff are looking at draft prospects, et cetera, somebody who doesn't fit the system more or less seamlessly is going to have some very special other gifts that we can, try to meld into the system for those decisions to go like that. But everything's on the table. And in today's world where everything is so dynamic and so much in flux, you got to be open to everything.
You mentioned Pascal and all the adaptations he had to make, and along with the ball pressure. I mean, you guys, and not this playoff run, but the prior playoff run, had more possessions of press than any team in the tracking era, according to Synergy. And in Second Spectrum, you had one of the highest pickup points. The NBA as a whole had the highest average pickup distance in the last 12 years. So I do agree, that was definitely a trend-setting thing because other teams started really applying all of that ball pressure. You mentioned that feeds into your offense identity and your pace. And what way specifically does applying more ball pressure also meld to this random offense identity, that the two go in hand so well?
Well, if you don't do that, if we were to approach, let's say, a first round playoff series against Milwaukee, and if we were going to just try to play straight, sort of traditional NBA defense, picking up at the 3-point at our defensive 3-point line and going from there and allowing the Lillards and the Giannis's just to run their offense, it would be very difficult, bordering on impossible for us to play at our best level, So, part of this is we play a lot of guys, and this is a way that for us to engage a lot of guys, try to keep our minutes reasonable, and try to get into the legs of the opponent. It's no secret, but that's a big part of the approach, and it's difficult. I mean, this is a hard style to play. It's a beautiful style to play. And I'll tell you this, I've had more people walk up to me randomly, that I don't know, and I don't get recognized that much out there in the world, and just say, hey, look, you don't know me, you don't know me, but watching your team this year was inspirational. It was. So you guys had a great run. I mean, dozens of people, and so this is meaningful. This is a meaningful part of the period of the game, and really, the NBA game has now become a play hard league. It's not just having being top heavy with stars, and roster construction is changing. Now it's become more important to have more good players than be top heavy with 2 or 3 great players that get all the touches, and so things are changing, and everybody is constantly watching what's going on.
Pascal in particular, I think the buy-in showed in a lot in the last 2 playoff runs, because it's not often that you see forwards and centers picking up full court as well. And Pascal totally bought into that and was able to implement it. But you talked about him not having as much of the ball when he came over here in terms of being the bring up ball handler. I think he's kind of the ultimate skeleton key. He can do a lot of different things if you need him to, and be placed in a lot of different positions. Do we anticipate him having more of the ball this year, since you guys aren't going to have Tyrese as your starting point guard, and you also don't necessarily have a third string point guard and Penn right now either?
Yeah, there's no doubt that he's going to be our closer. He and Nembhard are going to be involved in a lot of actions to close games. Certainly, Nesmith, Mathurin. We'll see with the center position how that shakes out. There's certainly a lot of options right now. Look, Pascal Siakam is a great player. I mean, he's convinced the world, I think, at this point. But I'm telling you, I don't throw the word great around very much. He is a great player. He's a phenomenal person. And he just, and I think I forget what terminology you used to describe him.
Skeleton key.
Skeleton key. Yeah. I mean, he's just so versatile on both sides of the ball. And like you said it, he was picking up full court last year against Milwaukee, guarding guys like Gary Trent Jr. and some of these wings that were handling the ball. That's hard to do.
In addition to guarding Karl-Anthony Towns and guarding Giannis, and being, he's probably 1 or 2 as your off-ball defenders too, and a linchpin behind some of your pick and roll coverages with his ability to help off and be in the gaps as well. So he definitely has a big part. But going back to random offense, if there's any con to doing random offense, by my eye, it might be that there's difficulty in getting 5 players organized at once. That can lead to some clunk with spacing, and a lot of times it might lead to more turnovers. But in you guys' case, you were one of the best low turnover teams in the NBA last year, top 5. And I guess you prefer the term ball security rather than the negative terminology of committing turnovers. But how do you balance those 2 things when you're playing random this much and that your guards weren't barely turning the ball over? I mean, I know a lot of this has to do with somewhat Tyrese's special skill set, but that's not typically something that goes hand in hand.
It isn't. And when we were struggling last year at the beginning of the year, and when we were struggling 2 years ago before the All-Star break in 24, our defense got way better after the All-Star break in 24. And one of the reasons was that our turnovers went way down. And so you've got to have low turnovers. I mean, ball security, possession of the ball is so meaningful in every sport. I don't need to tell you that. Every fan that watches NFL football, possession and field position it carries the day all the time. And so, yeah, I mean, there are challenges to it for sure. And without Tyrese this year, who's the ultimate ball security guy, I mean, Tyrese has set historic records, for ball security. I mean, beyond belief type of stuff. So, yeah, it's going to be something we're going to have to work at for sure.
Is there any concern? Maybe concern isn't the best term, but Andrew Nembhard, starting point guard. We talked about the ball pressure defense. We can also look back at game 6 against the Thunder, you guys pulled back some of that pressure. It helped preserve some of him with Tyrese playing more off ball. As he heads into a season where he's going to be the full-time starting point guard, you're not going to have Tyrese's gravity out on the floor with him. And he's been very, very important to your ability to set the tone defensively. Like, this is kind of an unprecedented load that's going to be on Andrew Nembhard when you look around the league at how many people are there who are starting at point, doing a lot of their team's initiating, and also guarding the other team's best player for a whole game. Like, I mean, just looking back at last year's mini series when he was in Atlanta, he's being guarded by Dyson Daniels, who's a defensive player of the year candidate. And he's also guarding Trae Young and picking up, at an average of 45, 50 feet.
I agree. And so there are many challenges, and we're talking about this right now, organizationally, from a roster construction standpoint for this season. Tyrese was rarely in foul trouble.
Yeah.
Like Caitlin, how many times was he in foul trouble last year? Real quick, tell me. How many?
I'm thinking maybe at most 2.
Yeah, 2, maybe 2. And it may have only been 1. How many times does Andrew Nembhard get a quick foul in the first minute and a half of a game?
A lot more than 2.
A lot more than 2. Like sometimes more than 2 a week. So Drew's going to have to adjust some. I mean, he's going to have to maintain his aggression defensively. I mean, because he loves to defend. I mean, this guy's a freak. Okay. He doesn't say shit to anybody. He just goes about his business. He's a quiet leader on our team. When he talks, people listen. I mean, the guy's a beast. And hey, we were 5-10 last year without him. And then with him, we were winning 65, 70% of our games. He's a huge part of it. And look, our game this year is going to look different. There are going to be times it doesn't look pretty. We're going to be more physical. I think we're going to be a more physical defensive team. All those kinds of things. But yeah, like things are going to change. Like Pascal is now going to become more of a primary ball handler. And you think of the other guys, we'll see who starts at center. Isaiah Jackson is an underrated ball handler and playmaker. So like he's in the mix. Jay Huff is a skilled guy. Wiseman, we haven't seen enough of him really yet to know for sure how exactly he's going to fit in. But yeah, and look, and Mathurin's going to have to take a step up as a guy that can read the game, make quick decisions, play off the pass and the move. And so, yeah, our fans this year are going to be in for a very interesting year. It's going to be a team that looks quite different. And really, I don't think it can be overstated how great a player Tyrese Haliburton is. I mean, you look at what he did the last 3 years, in 24 in the playoffs, Game 7 at Madison Square Garden, and then this year with all the stuff he pulled off at the end of games. I mean, starting with the 4-point play against Milwaukee in March or whenever that was. I mean, that was a season-changing play right there. And so we're going to miss Tyrese a lot, and people are going to find out. And look, I know how great he is. Unfortunately, I'm going to find out even more how great he is by not having him with us this year.
Would it be easier? Which would be easier for you to replicate with the current roster that you have, like if you needed to, and kind of easing some of this for Andrew Nembhard? Would it be easier to find guys who could be secondary ball handlers next to Nembhard in lineups, or would you feel more comfortable being like, hey, maybe we'll try Mathurin at some of the point of attack, or Ben Shepherd at some of the point of attack, or whoever else you might be thinking of?
Yeah, those questions are to be answered. I think the answer is some mixture of all that. But look, we got to protect Andrew. I mean, if going into this year we're saying the guy's going to play 37 minutes, and that's not happening. All right, he's going to have to be in the low 30s. And we're going to have to, TJ's going to have another great year, and we're going to have a third guy ready. You saw Cam Jones had a really good third game of his summer league, got better each game. Ray J. Dennis, is a good player. And, interestingly, the first summer league game this year looked like a replication of game 82 last year at Cleveland. Last 18 minutes of that game or 20 minutes of that game was their two-way guys against our two-way guys and their third-string guys against our third-string guys. It's the same damn game this year. It was really interesting to watch. So, and then we got Quentin Jackson. And, Quentin is just an in-your-face defensive, coming at you, get ready because here he comes kind of guy. And we're gonna need everybody. We're gonna need a combination of all that.
Are you amenable to watching a couple of clips with me about random offense if I promise not to reveal too much with what I show?
Sure.
Okay.
By the way, before we get into this, I just want to say, it's been so great to watch the ascent of your site, your writing, everything you're doing. I mean, you have the most unusually great site with Basketball She Wrote and your podcast of anything that any of us have ever seen in basketball. And I know for a fact that you've turned down overtures and offers from rivals of ours around the NBA. I just want to tell your fans and those watching that should follow you on Twitter, should sign up on Patreon, is that you're doing things that nobody's ever done on this platform. And I just want to tell you how much respect I have for what you do. I talk to Caitlin throughout the year from time to time, and she's been great we have conversations. I pick her brain about things, and she's simply the best of the best at what she does. So congrats on that. I know you won't rest on your laurels. You need more followers, and more people need to know about Basketball She Wrote. So I just want to get that. I just want to make sure I'm saying that because I really feel that way, and I know a lot of people that follow you do.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's a lot of high compliments, and now I must carry on with the clips and live up to this high standard, but I shall continue. So this one, the reason I'm bringing it up is I actually think it's somewhat of a league-wide trend in addition to showing how you guys go about playing random. This is when obviously you're playing in Boston. It's a drag screen from Miles, and there's not necessarily an on-ball advantage, so Tyrese gets off it pretty quickly, the benefit of having multiple ball handlers on the floor. Something that stands out to me here is a lot of times, and feel free to tell me, like, no, that is wrong, but when I'm thinking of you guys are one of the best teams I've seen at playing after the play and continuing to get to the next action. And you do that in a multitude of ways. But something that stands out to me is I don't often see you doing it with the big coming back out of the paint to reignite the offense with just a direct ball screen. A lot of times it's get actions, it's toss and chase, it's ghost screens. And that's what happens here with Ben Shepherd coming and screening for Andrew Nembhard to be able to get to the rim. So I guess my question with that becomes, now that we've seen that, is the league as a whole ran less pick and roll than at any time or averaged less picks per 100 possessions than any time in the last 12 years. So from your perspective and from a league-wide perspective, why do you think it's still the most prevalent play type, but it's gone down in frequency somewhat? Why do you think that the league's running less pick and roll? Why do you prefer to be going right into the ghost screen with the guards or not bringing the bigs back out of the paint a lot of times? If you do prefer that, feel free to say you're wrong. But
yeah, I remember sitting with Larry Brown in 2008. We were in Orlando. The Chicago pre-draft camp one year was in Orlando, and he was saying, Rick, what are you doing with pick and roll defense? He goes, I can't guard it because it's just, pick and rolls are impossible to guard. And they had a really good team. That was Detroit at the time, I think. And what's happened is people are doing a much better job of guarding pick and roll. They're much more physical. There's more switching. There's more gap shifting. There's all kinds of stuff. And the truth is, pick and roll is a two-man play in a 5-man game or a 4-man play in a 10-man game, however you want to look at it. And if you look at it as a 4-man play in a 10-man game, there are 6 other players out there that can distort it. And so it has to happen quick. In my view, the more dribbling involved makes it easier to guard. And the league has transitioned into a league that's done a much, much better job guarding pick and rolls over the past several years. And so, now there's a premium on space. There's a premium on ball movement. There's, if you watch what Memphis did at the beginning of the year last year, a lot of their stuff was based on double gap drives and then cutting based on the direction of the drive. And so, that stuff was game-changing stuff. And they had some changes as the year went on, but a lot of teams have studied what they have done. So I guess the answer to your question is, yeah, pick and roll is still difficult in the right context. But simply as a, drag screen type thing, with 2 competent defenders, not so much as it used to be.
Is there any consideration too that, you guys are playing at such a fast tempo? If the big is low, like what was the case in that clip, that if they come back out of the paint, is that giving a lot more opportunity to the defense to be calling out the coverage on that long run from the paint versus if you're doing like a quick get action, like if Tyrese gets off the ball, gives it to the big at the top and then goes back and gets it, that maybe there's less time for the defense to be communicating that?
Yeah, a lot of teams that don't have a stretch big are 4 out, 1 in teams, and they'll flash the big up at some point in the possession, or they'll have him in a drag and he'll dive and then he'll come back up. And if he's not a shooter, it makes it a little tougher offensively. And so, in those situations, you see a lot of off-ball action. Generally, the big is not popping very much if he's not a shooter. Without Miles Turner, this will be one of our challenges, and so we believe Jay Huff can do some of the things that Miles did very well, and stretching the floor and shooting is one of them. But in answer to your question, in my world, as somebody that views basketball a little bit like a jazz performance, we want it looking different every time if we can. That makes it harder for the defense to communicate. It makes it easier for us to create confusion and so on and so forth.
You're talking about replicating some of what Miles does and you guys playing 5 out. I think sometimes when I'm watching you guys play, because you do look for those seals so early in the clock with the runners, especially with Siakam and Obi Toppin at times, I would probably term it as you guys play inside, outside, inside. Like you'll have early seals if you can get them in the first like 6 seconds of the clock, and then you try to get to a 5 out alignment, and then sometimes the big comes back in for maybe a Gortat or a seal screen to open up a drive. How important do you think it is to be able to play 5 out this season? Do you think you'll be able to get to that, or do you still like the 4 out alignments? I mean, you guys play some of both.
Yeah, I think the truth is, without getting into too much strategic stuff and giving too much away, if you think about it, 5 out opens up the middle, but the gaps are smaller between players.
Yeah.
4 out, 1 in, the gaps are much bigger. And if the big has a good feel for movement along the baseline, it can be more effective as a drive, as a way to drive the ball. So, yeah, I mean, there are teams that function playing 5 out when a stretch big is in and 4 out, 1 in when he's not. And that are very effective at it. And it's tough because it presents 2 different things you have to prepare for, which is a bitch, So we don't know exactly how things are going to look because we don't know exactly what a rotation is going to look like. I mean, I think it's pretty easy to pencil in, 4 guys that I've talked about,
Right.
Nembhard, Mathurin, Nesmith, and Siakam. If you throw Huff in there, as a potential starter, then we could be playing some 5 out stuff for sure. If it's Isaiah Jackson, it doesn't necessarily preclude us from playing 5 out because Isaiah handles it, passes it very well, and drives it, and can create some confusion as a screener if his guy is backed off. So there are some possibilities there. But I think we're going to have to be ready to play out of both modes with the way our team is setting up. And don't forget that, Obi Toppin played a lot of 5-4s last year, particularly in the playoffs. And so that's going to be an alignment that's going to be there for us as well.
One of my favorite things that you guys do is when you sometimes will space and use Siakam at the elbows, but you put a guard in the dunker spot for the reason that you kind of just talked about. It does open up a wider gap, a wider entry point on the perimeter, but I've noticed more teams going to that. Oklahoma City does that. Boston will do some of that. And some of that's facilitated when you do have a shooting big out there who you can put in the strong side corner. But continued basketball diversity of who you can place where, I think, is continuing to trend with the league. But just to circle it back and put a bow on it, you said that you want random offense to look different every time. And I don't know if you're going to be aware of this, but there is a prevailing notion in NBA media circles that every team in the NBA is playing the same now, that the product has become too homogenized. Everybody's playing, I guess we've kind of debunked some of this already, but high pick and roll, one pass, it's too much of that. And the entertainment value certainly isn't your concern. Your job is to be winning basketball games. But just to know, do you agree that the NBA is too homogenized, that all teams are playing the same style, especially with what we've talked about with regards to playing random offense?
I disagree with that. I've experienced it really over, I'm going into 24 years as a head coach. I mean, things have changed a lot. High pick and roll at the end of the game is something that I think we'll always see some form of. Some people use the pitch. Throughout the game, the pitch is one of the harder things to guard, as we're finding out. I think it's hard to call it homogenized from my perspective with how we play, because, every possession can look so different. And look, I would also write that off to people that are, a bunch of half empty people, and I can't view the game. I can't view the game like that. I can't view our team like that. I simply cannot. When you're in a position to lead and to teach, you want to be challenged. It's great to have all pieces that fit together, but how do you ever get better if you don't have challenges before you? And so I look forward to that kind of stuff. But getting back to your question, I don't see it that way. Do you?
No, I mean, this is something that I've been battling against for the better part of a year. For whatever reason, this is a growing thought.
Who are you battling?
Oh, this is a prevailing talking head thing that's been going around on major networks, that the NBA, because of the 3-point line, has become boring and that every team plays the same way. And I just don't understand that. I mean, you just talked about Memphis barely running pick and roll last year. I don't know how you watch a game of the Memphis Grizzlies, then watch a game of the Denver Nuggets, then watch you guys play, and then watch the Boston Celtics play and think all four of those teams are playing the same way. It's lost on me.
Yeah, New York was another team that was a top 5 offensive team last year too, and so I don't buy that. But Caitlin, here's the deal. You proclaim it's not true, and people will agree because you're an expert.
My last question, which, since my dad did grow up in a coaching background, he coached high school basketball for 12 years. He was very adamant when I told him that I was going to do this podcast that I needed to ask this question. So this one is for him. You coached at the Pacers once before. You've coached many places. You won a championship in Dallas. You just went to the NBA Finals with the Indiana Pacers. Do you have a stylistic through line as a coach? Is there anything that you've taken with you to each one of those stops, whether strategically or philosophically, or just in your overall coaching style? Or would you say that the through line is that there isn't a through line?
Through line? I don't understand what that means.
Is there anything that connects all of the ways that you've coached those teams?
Yeah, I'm a much bigger believer than I ever was, and this happened to me in Dallas. I told you the story, with Jason Kidd, a believer in the importance of player empowerment. That players believe that they're in control of their individual and team destiny. And look, sometimes you have to help them reconcile the individual and the team stuff. I talked about Ben Mathurin and some of the things that he's going to have to see maybe a little bit differently to become, the best version of himself with the Indiana Pacers. But I marvel at what players are capable of. Having a guy like Tyrese Haliburton, I cannot begin to tell you what that means to a coaching staff, an organization, and a fan base. You look at the trajectory in the last 3 years. I mean, really in 22, 23, we were 5 games above 500 in January when he had the UCL. Miles all of a sudden couldn't play in the game at New York. O'Shea Brissett had a hamstring thing, and all of a sudden I was starting James Johnson in a game at Madison Square Garden where we were 5 games above 500 and we were shooting up the standings in the East. And then we lost like 9 out of 10 or 9 out of 11. And so, and a lot of that was, no Tyrese during that period of time. And so, the ability of players and, my belief in our players has got to be something that's unbending on the one hand. On the other hand, they have to understand that, I've also got to be somebody that can, push the reset button from time to time, on what's happening out there to make sure that everybody is moving in the right direction, in the same direction. But you have a choice in life on what you focus on, and you can focus on problems or you can focus on solutions. And I can tell you right now, after 41 years in the NBA or 40 years or whatever it's been, I'm focused on solutions every day, all the time.
That's a great way of putting it and wrapping it up, because when I did podcasts ahead of the NBA Finals, that is what I termed you guys as. I thought it was going to be a series of the Thunder being very good at creating problems and you guys being very good at solving problems. So that the fact that that's the way that you view coaching, I think, is the perfect way to tie this up. But I guess I should have brought up too, I don't know if I'm breaking news, but you let me know ahead of time that you're going to be retiring from the Coaches Association. And then, as I said, because I come from a coaching background, this is something that actually interests and matters to me. So what has that meant to you, being the head of it?
Well, it's been an amazing honor. And this will be 20 years. They're 2-year terms. Virtually every year was unopposed. I mean, it's not a job that people are clamoring for, but over the last year, I've made it clear to everyone that this will be the last year, and we do have some really great people that are interested in it. It's been a great opportunity to lead, and it's been a great opportunity to learn, establish important relationships with Adam Silver and everybody in the league office. We've been able to get some important things done over that period of time, and so. But 20 years is enough, and I feel like it's the right time to turn the page. And there are some great opportunities for the next person coming in to do some great things as well. So it's been a lot of work, but it's certainly been a labor of something that I've believed in and had a great time doing. And I've worked with David Fogel the last several years, worked with Michael Goldberg before that. The Goldberg Award, of course, is named after Michael Goldberg, our founder and original executive director. And, it's onward and upward.
Well, I'm very glad that you are the coach of the Indiana Pacers. I think that most Pacer fans are pretty happy about that, especially with the run that you guys just completed going to the NBA Finals this year. So thank you very much for your time. You've given me a whole hour of your time, and you're very generous with your responses and answers as well. So
I'm very glad and very happy and very privileged to call you a trusted friend. So thank you. And, I read your stuff religiously because I always learn from it. So keep it coming.